Hello and welcome to the Switch for Good podcast. I'm Alexandra Paul and I'm here with my wonderful co-host Dotsie Bausch. Hi, Dotsie.
Hello there.
So I hear there's a new scientific report that Switch for Good has been working on that's coming out.
It's so exciting. And by the time this airs, it is going to be out.
Awesome.
We're really excited. We've been working on it for, almost 8 months. It is titled Dairy Does a Body Bad, a scientific report on cow's milk, health, and athletic performance. And it is a review of 322 studies. It is written by 8 MDs and 2 registered dietitians, and it's pretty extraordinary, I think, because this is it's unprecedented. It's a never before compiled of all of these studies that help us to understand the true science, the good science behind what's wrong with cow's milk and dairy for human consumption. Over a century, cow's milk has been touted, right, as this health fluid, and goodness gracious, it's all very effective and memorable marketing, but is it good science? So this report exposes Big Dairy's flawed research. And I think throughout this journey, there were so many studies that Big Dairy has done where the key issue is a flawed control. That's really when you dive in past the abstract, that's what you find. And
so you're saying that they would say milk is great compared to, and
perfect. Exactly.
Give me some examples of what they would compare
to. Well, yes,
to.
let me do that for you. So in a study, this is my favorite, in a study where they wanted to prove that chocolate milk was an excellent recovery beverage, and they did this in rock climbing, in the sport of rock climbing and judo. They compared chocolate milk. Well, let me let you guess what they compared chocolate milk to. What would make
Oreos.
sense? That would make sense.
Water.
Oh, you knew.
I knew because
I talk about it all the time.
Because you're my friend. I know
you knew. So yes, right? Like that's not what anyone thinks when it comes out. Oh yes, chocolate milk is a fantastic recovery tool compared to something with no calories. It's always going to come out on top, right? And I always say with this one, you're going to be better off with a mouthful of dirt is going to be better than water to recover from, right? At least you get some little B12 and you get some macronutrients and micronutrients. But so this report, it talks about the associations between dairy consumption and chronic disease, dairy's negative effect on athletic performance. There's a section in the beginning on the history of dairy's marketing tactics, kind of how they've exploited and targeted athletes, how dairy disproportionately sickens people of color, which we've talked about a lot on this show, and also an optimum dairy-free nutrition section for athletes. So it really challenges conventional wisdom. This report is for the public, so it's written, the MDs did a fantastic job in really writing it in layman's term. I said, you guys, I don't want this to be just like so dry and in the weeds that, I can't sit there and read the 30 pages and understand what's going on. So it is written in layman's term, and this report will release to the public, but we are also sending it to every professional ball sports performance director in the United States. So NBA, MLB, also every college and university and some high schools athletic directors. So in which, Built with Chocolate Milk has infiltrated a lot of those programs and our sponsors a lot of those programs. So
You're going to send it to the Olympic Committee?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. My friends.
You're going to sign it, Dotsie.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this report is going to flip the switch, if you will, on what a lot of people believe as true science. But when they are open and willing to dive in enough and look at the skewed science and then understand the science that we're presenting and sharing, and we dive deep into these studies, and talk about the control and how they got to where they did. I'm hoping it's going to help millions of people. All of the industry-funded studies. That's what these doctors, performance directors, athletic directors have been receiving for years.
So these are the other studies that folks
This is the other
seen.
side that they just have never seen to understand the other side. So, and I should mention for everyone listening, you have access to this report. It's super easy. Everybody knows switchforgood.org who's listening, I think. And you go there and we've got a big blue bar across the home page where you can click and download the report. So you can have it for yourself. You can share it with whoever you want to share it with. So you have everybody has access. It is the actual report is about 30 pages, but it ends up around 50 because all the references listed. So it's like 15, 322 studies and all the references. It took some pages there to fit those in, which are very important that they're there. So, the actual tofu of the study, not meat of the study, is about 30 pages.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, that's doable for all of us. So
it is. I think so. And our good friend and board member and guest on this show, Miss Kathy Freston, thinks that we need to make this into a book, like a short medical book. And she's helping me on the road to getting that out there after, it releases. And we get some traction. So
excellent. All right, well, let's introduce our guest, who will also teach us a lot about why milk does not do a body good, why it does a body bad.
There you go.
Julieanna Hever isn't just a plant-based dietitian. She is the plant-based dietitian.
And we've had a lot of dietitians on the show, and that's, not putting them down, but this girl's one of the OGs.
Yeah, she's been spreading the plant-based word for years. She's written many books, including The Idiot's Guide to Plant-Based Nutrition, and also her new book, The Health Span Solution, which is here, and it's terrific. It's beautiful. It's got amazing recipes in it. You might have seen her on the Dr. Oz show. She's got a very active YouTube channel. She's been on many talk shows. She's an incredible nutritionist. She doesn't just give clients a meal plan and just let them go. She really helps them understand the why behind the nutrition. And as we all know, where there's a why, there's a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so let's talk to Julieanna Hever today and find out why. Hello, Julieanna, and welcome to Switch for Good.
Thank you so much, Alexandra and Dotsy. It's so nice to be here.
So, we want to hear, we always like hearing how people became so interested in nutrition and especially plant-based nutrition. Can you start off, start off telling us how your eyes were opened to the plant-based world? Because you weren't headed off in that direction at first as an adult.
Well, it's actually two parallel stories that converged ultimately. Part of which is I grew up in Los Angeles, and as many of you know, I was a dancer and an actress, and so that's the culture of LA where you're constantly watching your weight. I had my dance teacher at 11 or 10 years old tell me to cut out my snacks, and my manager tell me to lose weight. So I was always fascinated from a nutritional perspective anyway, and I began studying and reading everything I can get my hands on. So it wasn't much longer when I was a teenager when I ran into John Robbins' book, Diet for a New America. And that opened my mind dramatically. I wanted nothing to do with the process of how food ended up on our plate like that. I was horrified, and I stopped cold tofu. I like how you said that, Dotsy. And I was like, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't cook. There was no internet or Google back then. My mom was like, a veggie what? What are you doing? So I was kind of winging it and trying to just eat anything that didn't have an animal product in it. And needless to say, this didn't go over very well. And my parents were good parents. They were worried about me, and they had their friend who is a nurse stage an intervention. And we all went out to a steakhouse. And I write about this in Vegetarian Diet because it was quite traumatizing, because once you know, you can't unknow that part of it. But our friend kept, she told me about how I'm going to be deficient in B12 and iron and protein. And she scared me. I was young and I was nervous. So I went back to the regular way of eating, but I knew there had to be more to the story. Like, you don't hear about vegetarians just dropping dead all the time. Like, that was just not a thing. And again, there was no access to the internet. So it was like, okay. So I just kept reading every book I can get my hands on. Simultaneously, they kept telling me to lose weight, and they're like, okay, become a or go work with a personal trainer. So I worked with this personal trainer. And because I'd also loved teaching exercise since I was like 5, I know it sounds weird, I fell in love with personal training. And then I started personal training after I finished undergrad. But people were asking me about nutrition, and I'm like, I don't want to give answers just from that one chapter that I studied in my personal training handbook. I wanted to know why I was saying it. And what you just say, when there's a why, there's a way. That was great. And that's what I did. I enrolled in graduate school and had the best time of my life educationally, learning about everything nutrition and science and chemistry and statistics and digging into the literature, which I cannot wait to read you this study. I'm going to go download that as soon as we hang up. That was it. And then everything came together. Like, oh, wait, you can get iron better sourced from plants. And oh, there's plenty of protein in the plant kingdom. All of those questions that was it. And then I couldn't stop talking about it. And that's when I started writing and speaking, and everything just kind of flowed because it was the most extraordinary thing. I started on myself. Like, I went plant-based myself. And we weren't really saying plant-based very much back then. And my health changed dramatically, like lifelong chronic conditions like acne and GI problems and sinus infections, just gone, especially the dairy. So that was it. I just started doing that with my clients, and that was it. I can't stop talking about it.
Yeah, it's contagious.
Now, I haven't heard a lot of folks say that when they were learning about nutrition in school, that is what pushed them towards a plant-based diet, because my understanding is that traditional education doesn't do that. Were you at an extraordinary school, or did you come to this more on your own?
No, that's a very good question. I'm glad you pointed that out. No, I went to a very traditional school. There are no plant-based dietetics programs yet. I'm certain they're going to be coming. There's no way this won't happen. But what happened for me was I got the confidence in understanding the backstory. I learned how to analyze research so that when I finished, I started digging into the literature directly instead of relying on my parents' friend's nurse to say I'm going to be deficient. I was like, oh wait, let's just look into this a little bit. So that's when I was like spurred to like really go for it and deep dive into it. I went around the country and interviewed, like the leading experts like Dr. Campbell and Dr. Furman and Dr. McDougall, all those people, like the pioneer physician and researchers. And I made a movie about it because I just wanted to learn all about it. And with that background, it enabled me to see the story a little differently, or a lot differently.
Mm-hmm. I read somewhere, and this just piqued my interest as a former athlete, because I agree with it, but I want to know. You evidently, and just tell me if I'm wrong and we'll just move on, you don't like to, or you don't work with bodybuilders because you don't think it's a healthy lifestyle.
Oh, you're paying attention.
Because I agree.
What?
I agree with the unhealthy lifestyle. I know quite a few bodybuilders. Yeah, I'll let you go.
I do a lot of sports nutrition, so don't get me wrong. I work with all sorts of athletes, but a few years ago, I stopped working with bodybuilders specifically because the process of getting on the stage is unhealthy. It's not something I would recommend. My goal with everyone, because I work with people from the womb to seniors and everyone in between, and athletes and everyone at different stages of health. And ultimately, like, you can do anything, including weight loss, all that stuff, everything I want people to do with optimal health in mind, because you can have all of it. You can have both sides of that. So I just don't think that's a healthy way to do it. And I think I just don't want to encourage that. And there's a very certain specific way that you have to get to that point where you're shredding and all that stuff. And I can't support that professionally for myself, for people.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a slippery slope road, and continuing to compete, which means you're continuing to shred and continuing to practice what would really be considered as disordered eating behaviors. And it's so easy, and I know from my history, to allow that to infiltrate and kind of take over your life, to then practice outside of the shredding window. It's a tough deal.
Now, you've written books and created recipes and participated in some serious research. What is, through all of that, what is your overall food philosophy now? And has it changed over the years from when you first interviewed all those experts?
So, yes, my food philosophy has evolved over the years. Of course it has. And I feel very peaceful for the point I'm at now, because my goal, everyone gets intimidated. Well, first of all, there's so much misinformation out there, and there's so many confusing, contradictory facts that everyone hears everywhere, from the researcher to the layperson and everyone in between. It's just, there's so much confusion. So I feel like my goal is to make it as simple as humanly possible. And so I've distilled it down into a very simple language that I think has made it easier for a lot of people and for my message. So yes, I've evolved to this place now where I just want people to stop talking about macronutrients, stop talking about all that stuff. I want to talk about food. So I want people to eat vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices in infinite tasty combinations. And I've added to that, well, what does that mean? That's a whole slew of opportunity for food choices. And like what we did in the book, well, we have 4 chapters: soup, salad, sides, and sweets. And it's all constituents are those foods that I just listed. But from a nutritional standpoint, I also use a mnemonic called the 6 daily threes, because some foods have nutritional uniquenesses, I don't think that's a word, but unique properties in certain food groups that I think should be prioritized in a diet. So one of which would be like green leafy vegetables and cruciferous vegetables. Those are extraordinary. That's in one category. And then other colored vegetables, the reds, the oranges, the yellows, all those. And then fruits and legumes. So lentils, peas, beans, hummus should be a food group, tofu and tempeh. And then nuts and seeds is the 5th food group. And that's, I want you to have about 1 to 2 ounces a day. And then finally, the 6 of the daily threes would be movement and activity. So not necessarily a food, but those food groups all have unique nutritional properties and health promoting properties that I like people to kind of focus on, making sure that that's where they prioritize every day. And that's what they think about every day.
That's such a great way to look at it. I the 6 daily threes. You've spoken about, let's say for people that are trying to hopefully lose some weight. You've spoken about dietary restriction without malnutrition, which is really important. Can you explain that and what you mean exactly by that?
Yes, it's so interesting. Okay, so I literally went around the world defending the adequacy of a plant-based diet for 12 years. I was like, no, you can get your, because of my experience and what everyone says, you can get your protein, you can. And that was what the basis of a lot of my lectures were, and TV interviews, all of that. And when I stumbled upon the health span literature, which is what this book kind of centers around, the only way we've ever actually extended health span and longevity in every model organism tested, from yeast to our primate cousins, from a dietary perspective, is with what you said, dietary restriction without malnutrition. In fact, it looks like it's the dietary essential amino acids, the protein restriction, that seems to help enhance health span and longevity. So interestingly, perhaps one of the reasons, the many reasons that a plant-based diet is so effective at promoting long-term health is because of what it naturally restricts or limits, which was kind of mind-blowing if you think about it like that. But in terms of weight loss, so that's just in general about health. In terms of weight loss, I have a whole philosophy on weight loss. It's more, you have to create a deficit. There's no way around that. But I also recommend the dietary restriction without malnutrition for everyone, because there seems to be a lot of benefit just with that alone, just eating less frequently, and stuff that we always did naturally, but because we never lived in times of such abundance where food is everywhere, all 24/7, we're bombarded with food messaging. So, it's changed. Our environment has changed, and we haven't adapted to that change yet. And that's why we're seeing so much worldwide obesity and chronic disease. And it's probably why this virus is taking such a toll, is because of all these comorbidities. It's interesting times.
And people, are obsessed with the macros. I say, at least if you're going to be obsessed about something, at least be obsessed with the micros. But people, the industry's done a great job of getting us obsessed with protein. So when you're on, let's say, Dr. Oz, and you have like 45 seconds to tell someone that there's enough protein in a plant-based diet, what's your pitch? What's it sound like?
Well, that's changed a lot over the years as well. In fact, my clip is on YouTube. You could see it where I said, oh, it's a protein party in the plant-based world, because there's so much protein. It's not a problem. So I have a lot of different pitches I could do on protein, because it's such a hotly contested topic. Yeah. But let me sum it up into this term. And we talk about this in Health Span Solution. We also talk about it in the Idiot's Guide to Plant-Based Nutrition, the 2nd edition. We call it macroconfusion. And the best example of that is a study, I believe it was 2 years ago, I think it was 2018, and it was a review study, and the conclusion of the title was both low-carb diets and high-carb diets increase mortality.
Well,
What do you do with that information? So what's a moderate carb? And so
Right.
there's just literally no reason for us to use biochemistry. And what is a carb? A carb is not a food group. I've had a meme that says carbs
Yes.
are not a food group for years because, if you look at, everyone thinks of a potato as a carb, right? Many people think, oh, I'm trying to avoid carbs, so I'm not eating a potato. Well, potatoes actually have a better amino acid score than 90% lean beef. So how does that make it a carb? It's got essential amino acids. It's got all those other things. Like, it just, putting them into those categories is lunacy. And we've gotten so spiraled out of control. It doesn't serve any purpose. You don't need to count anything. That's why I'm really trying to get the conversation back to foods that people can identify and can think about in actual practical terms.
Okay, so we need to call a potato our protein food.
No,
It's our perfect food is what it is.
It's a starchy vegetable. It's a potato. It's a starchy vegetable. It's not a carb. It's not a protein.
Right.
All
Right.
whole
It's
foods
just food.
have some ratio of protein, carbs, and fat. The only time you get a pure carb, that's white sugar. A pure fat is oil. But other than that, meat will have like protein and fat. But all whole foods have some ratio of all three of those, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You could be healthy on a vegan low carb diet and a vegan high raw diet. You could be healthy on a very low fat, more like a starch based diet. There are so many ways to be healthy. It has nothing to do with the macronutrients. That's why there's so much confusion. That's why there's so much research, people debating back and forth, because it doesn't matter. It's the wrong direction, and we've gone so deep into it that we just need to somehow pull ourselves out.
I think that's the beauty, really, of you saying why we don't need to count, is because every whole food that is alive has all three macronutrients because it was alive, right? You need humans, we need all three macronutrients. If we didn't get one of them entirely and completely out, we would die. So it's like, it's just a beautiful thing that it's the math is already made easy for us in nature. It already has all three. So just eat beautiful, colorful food.
Just eat fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices in infinite tasty combinations. I also say eat the rainbow every day. You want to have plenty of color because those colors, those pigments themselves in the fruits and vegetables and whatever else you're eating, those represent a whole host of gorgeous phytonutrition that have all sorts of health promoting properties like anti-inflammation and decreasing risk for cancers and cardiovascular disease, bone protective, heart protective, so many different things, and they're all represented by the color pigments themselves, or they're part of the pigmentation. So if you just focus on trying to get lots of color, everyone will agree to this too. The USDA, the American Cancer Society, Harvard, everyone agrees that half your plate should come from fruits and vegetables. And I think that simplifies things as well. Just to think about it like that, just eat more fruits and vegetables, just like our mothers and grandmothers and everyone down the line has always said to us. It really is that simple.
You worked with John Robbins, who wrote Diet for a New America, the book that inspired you on your plant-based journey. You work with him in a study to help food bank clients on a 28-day challenge, and I'm assuming, eat whole food plant-based, and you saw incredible results. Can you tell us about that study?
It's incredible. There was a food bank in Sacramento, and we gave them a whole food plant-based diet. We taught them, we did their measurements before and after the month and gave them a lot of education, lots of talks and shopping and a little bit of exercise. And the results were extraordinary. What I like to say now, because now I've seen this done thousands of times over and over again, I always say, unlike the drug commercials, I always say results are typical. My clients get off their medications normally, not all medications, not all the time, but it happens all the time. Like recently, I have a new client. In a week, she got off her high blood pressure meds. And this happens. And we saw that with this group in Sacramento, and it was extraordinary. And especially when it's funny because I would almost say that, oh yeah, that's just what happens. But it's so exciting that you can't get sick of hearing it. I can't hear it too much because it's so amazing. What I was taught in graduate school and what I know doctors, I've talked and spoken to a lot of healthcare practitioners. A lot of my talks are to healthcare professionals over the years. And what we learn in school is, no, once you're on a medication, Your goal is to not increase the medication. Your goal is for them to not progress with their disease. We didn't talk about reversal. And we've seen that in the literature, an actual reversal only with a plant-based diet of stuff like advanced stage cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, conditions that were supposed to be forever and just progressively worse and worse. But it's the food. It's always the food.
Mm-hmm. And you were actually married to a doctor at one time, and so you went to his nutrition classes and sort of you had a bird's eye view of what doctors are actually taught in nutrition and why our system is so broken and why, basically the traditional medical world doesn't link diet with disease.
So when he was in medical school, I sat in on the nutrition class, and I was in graduate school at the time studying to be a dietitian. So I was really excited to see what they were going to teach them. It's like I got the inside scoop. And it's so funny because, they would talk about, here's the extent of what they learned. Goiter is an iodine deficiency. Rickets is a D deficiency, like that kind of thing. So it was like deficiency, diagnosis, and then give a nutrient, like medicine, like high blood pressure, give them this med, or this med. That's just how they're taught. And that's what medicine is based on. It's just how it's been the last, I don't know how long century. And it was fascinating. But what's even more fascinating is that while I was married to this man and we would go around, wherever, everyone would ask him the nutrition questions. And he'd be like, why are you asking me? You should ask her, And the last talk I gave before COVID was in November. I think there were 1,300 healthcare professionals in the audience. And I think it's cool because a lot of the, my clients will go to their doctors and I'll arm them with all the data. Here's my papers to the Physician's Guide to Plant-Based Diets. I have 2 of those that I've published. And I'll say, tell them this, tell them you're gonna get off your medication really fast. Be sure that they're on alert. And I give them this whole thing, to learn. And I think a lot of doctors, most of them just don't want anything to do with it. They don't want to believe that food is that powerful, but it is. But some of them are like, oh my goodness, whatever you're doing, it's working. And I think it's kind of had this ripple effect where the physicians are going, well, what are you doing? And then they want to do that with their other patients because doctors aren't used to having their patients get better. It's just not something they're used to.
Yeah, they deal in sickness, not wellness. I mean, that's just, it's what they go to school for, is to not look kind of behind or before the sickness, but what to do now after you're already sick, sadly in a way. But so many MDs, especially in the plant-based space, are leaning into all of the evidence-based nutrition because they want to be able to do both, right? Really combine food and wellness with traditional evidence-based medicine because, obviously sometimes, many times we need it. It saves lives. So that combination is what I think is so powerful. What is toxic hunger? When I saw that in the research, is like, okay, I'm dying to dive into that.
It's really interesting. It's actually a concept that Dr. Joel Fuhrman talks about, and he actually did a guest post on my blog many, many years ago about it, which I would encourage you to read and to look at his work. It's the whole concept is people think, I work with a lot of people I take them through a weight loss program. I do lifestyle transformation with my clients, and weight loss is usually the primary goal. Of course, getting off meds and all that almost always accompanies that. But what happens is people think, my stomach's growling, or I feel yucky, I'm tired, I have no energy. And, they think that that's hunger, that they need to eat for instant energy. And what Dr. Fuhrman talks about is there's almost like, first of all, if you think about it from an adaptive standpoint, evolutionarily speaking, why would we get tired and weak and listless and unable to do anything if we needed to go hunt and gather food? That just doesn't even make sense from a survival perspective. When you're metabolizing your own body fat, which means you've gone through your glycogen and now you're burning some body fat, there are some accumulated toxins in there. And so there's those feelings that people get, they're feeling crummy when they're, eating less or just they're hungry. It's not hunger. It's just detoxification and going through, toxins accumulate in the fat tissue, and as you're metabolizing it gets released into the bloodstream. So I think that's part of it. What's also interesting is that it's not like you eat and it turns into instant fuel. So we have a lot of misunderstandings about how much to eat and when to eat and how food affects us. I think food absolutely affects us in a million ways, but it's not as simple as we think, or I don't know if I would say as simple as we think. I think there's a lot more to the story, and it makes more sense if you think about evolution and survival, because we're made to survive. And you'd be surprised, like people could go a long time, a lot longer without food than we think. And that's not a bad thing by going on a diet or whatever. So there's a lot of myths out there. And I just want people to feel more confident. Like, you can lose weight. You don't have to be starving. Like starving is a very real thing, but it's not what most people are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So it's really interesting. It's interesting psychologically too.
Yeah. I always, this is not evidence-based. This is Dotsie Bausch-based, but I have almost always, when I think I'm hungry, I'm dehydrated. Almost every single time. I'll drink one, way over 8 ounces, maybe 10 or something of water, and wait a moment, or, and it's, I was thirsty. I was dehydrated.
Dr. Furman talks about a feeling in your throat when you're hungry, that's true hunger. I still have not identified that. So what I use with my clients and myself is, when you're hungry, everything sounds good, but when you're full, like nothing sounds good. You're like, oh yeah, I'll think about that later. Like, you can't pick a meal when you're full because you just don't want to think about food. But the hungrier you get, the more everything sounds delicious, right? You can't choose what to eat because there's so many, everything sounds good. So I use it, I call it the celery stick test, and sometimes also the apple test, because some people just despise celery. If you're hungry enough to eat celery, you're hungry. It works. It's like another way that's not a feeling, that you can kind of use it more psychologically, and it's more easy to assess for a lot of people. So that's what I use.
So are you saying that a grumbling stomach is not a sign of hunger?
Good question. Well, your body is used to habit, and we have very tightly regulated circadian rhythms that are brilliant and brilliantly woven in with the universe and every organism. It's so beautiful, and like it's almost romantic if you think about it. And so we are used to habit, and if we eat every day at 8 a.m., at 7:50 our GI tract is like, oh, it's time to spew out those chemicals and those hormones to get ready to digest. But if you change it and you shift your clock and you eat every day only at whatever, if you change it, your body will adjust. It takes some time, but a grumbling stomach is just hormones going through, digestive enzymes going through, and it probably means that you've been eating at that same time every day. That's usually what happens. But yeah, and if you let it go for a while and it goes away, people that are naturally lean, I don't know that many. My best friend and my ex-husband are like, I have always been fascinated by them because they're the kind of people that they eat to live instead of live to eat, like me and most people. And like, I always love to watch them eat. Even now, like, if he's my ex-husband, I still always love to watch him eat. So it's so interesting. They don't like to get full. They naturally restrict if they've eaten too much over the few days. They just have these natural instincts that they don't let get bombarded by social cues. And I've studied them just because it's so interesting to me. That's why I'm a dietitian. I'm obsessed with, how I love food. I used to go into people's homes when I was a kid and sit in front of their pantries just to study what was in their pantry. So I just think it's interesting. I don't know. Yeah.
That hormonal clock explains my canine, Yodi. He's the only, I think he's the only dog on the planet that gets breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I don't know why we started that, but we did when he came into our lives.
Get that too.
Okay, yeah.
And snacks.
It's sort of kind of, but he comes up to them. I mean, obviously we're working from home, and he comes up to the office. He eats at 5:30, noon, and 6. And so at 11:50, he comes and sits right next to me and starts the whole thing. The whole wine is like, we call it campaigning for lunch. And his little body it's time. So I love that. It's not really his paw clock. It is his internal hormone clock. And he does the same thing for dinner. He starts campaigning like 5:45. It's like every single day. It's cool.
So speaking of clocks, because you brought up clocks in the HealthSpan solution, you talk about chronobiology. Can you talk a little bit, explain what that is? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's basically what we're talking about, is circadian rhythms. And we're on this clock, like we have different hormones are released throughout the day. Like for instance, melatonin goes very higher in the evening so that you can cool down your body and go to sleep. But as you get older, that starts to tick off, which is why it gets harder to sleep for a lot of people as we get older. That's why teenagers sleep all the time, because they're at peak production. So, and then in the morning, cortisol level goes very high, and so that you warm up and wake up. And so there's all these different things that happen, and that's basically the biology of what happens. It's the same thing for all organisms, and it's basically saying that our bodies are on a clock that is endogenous and part of our system that we were born with. So, and it's interwoven with other things in the universe, like the tides and our monthly biology that happens too for women. Like there's just so many things that are interrelated and all tied to a clock. It's fascinating. There's a lot to be said about it. We talked a lot about that in the book. If you want to deep dive in the science, and there's some references to dig even deeper, but it is very interesting.
And how does eating to match your chronobiology? Because now we are so not in tune with the natural rhythms of nature and light. So we turn on the lights at night.
Noise for those that live in cities.
Yeah, noise. We turn on the lights at night. We go to bed way later. We get up after the sun has risen. A lot of folks do. We're inside most of the time when it's light out. So we've completely scrambled this clock thing in terms of syncing with nature. So what do you recommend in terms of eating with our chronobiology?
Yes, that's a very good point. And not only, and you reminded me that there's also seasonal shifts. It's not just daily and monthly, but there's seasonal shifts. So, we normally would experience cold winters and hot summers and whatever, mild or whatever, depending on where we live. But we are like normo temperature all the time, like from your house to the car, to the airport, to the plane, to the destination. We are on the same mono temperature with give or take a few degrees. Light, we control the light outside exogenously. It's a very good point. So from a food standpoint, again, everything is about habit. So you can optimize all that in different ways. I would say sticking to a routine is very helpful for a lot of reasons, especially if you want to really just routine is really healthy. And earlier in the day is easier. It's absorbed better in terms of our chronobiology. And so a lot of people are doing time-restricted feeding. I do time-restricted feeding. I do that with my clients as well. So I keep my fed window into a shorter period of time, usually between 4 to 6 hours a day in the fed state, because all that time in the fasted state is very, very health promoting, and for lots of reasons, including this. So, but there is some evidence that it doesn't really matter when that fed window is, but what you're just saying, I would have to say that it looks like there's more benefit to shifting that time in the fed state to earlier in the day, so you have all night to be recovering because of just the way the hormones are released at night and everything. So it's optimal to kind of shift your feeding towards earlier during the day. But that said, even just having that extra time in the fasted state gives your body so much time to get rid of, all this metabolic house cleaning it needs to do, like getting rid of extra cancer cells or viruses or bacteria, just house cleaning that can't be done necessarily while we're in the fed state. It is so labor intensive to eat. Every time from the last swallow, it takes 4 to 6 hours to finish the digestion and absorption process. So it's very labor intensive. And you want to give yourself some time off for all that healing and other activities and necessary things your body needs to do. And sleep. You sleep better when you're not digesting and absorbing. I think a lot of people will agree not to go to bed, not to eat and then go to bed. So it's interesting.
That was always like a really tough balance as an athlete, getting in the calories close enough to the event so that you didn't run out of steam, run out of glycogen, run out of fuel, but that so your body wasn't spending all of its energy digesting the food, and it was spending its energy, in my case, on my leg muscles, pushing that oxygen through and going faster and faster. And it was, I don't think I really nailed it or, truly figured out the timing until very late in my career. It's hard to do.
It's very hard to do. It's very hard to do because you're adding all the stuff that I'm talking about for everyday life to a sport, to training and recovery. And you don't want to cramp. Is a whole, it's fascinating. And it takes a lot of, basically you want to get a PhD in your own body and how it works and what works best for you. Because there are some individual variability in there. Like some people are different with different foods and different timing. So yes, it's tricky.
Mm-hmm. When you went to nutrition school, when you were learning about nutrition, were they saying that many meals a day was the best thing? Because we heard that it kept your blood sugar even if you ate a little bit. Kind of makes sense to me. And then it didn't overtax your digestive system. But now I'm hearing from you that you're eating within a very small window probably 1,800, 2,000 calories or something. That's a lot of digesting to do in a short period of time. And I'm wondering, in terms of people who are your clients who are diabetic, do you still feel confident that telling them to eat within a small window, it still keeps their blood sugar even?
Well, diabetics is different than, that's a good question. It depends. And when you're shifting, if we're talking about type 2 diabetes, which is much easier to talk about because type 1 diabetes is very different. They're very, very different diagnoses and to deal with. And first of all, if you have type 2 diabetes and you switch to a plant-based diet, you may very well not have diabetes anymore, type 2 diabetes anymore. People literally recover from type 2 diabetes eating a plant-based diet. That said, blood sugar, what you're saying, yes, that's pretty much what I learned kind of in grad school, but it was like there was some room they didn't really know, so yeah, fuel your fire. And I came from it as I was a personal trainer. So I was always interested in the sports nutrition message and weight loss and all that stuff. So there's so much there we can unpack. I don't even know where to start. But with diabetes, it's interesting because it's not exactly what we think it is. And eating a plant-based diet is so effective at reversing type 2 diabetes that it doesn't even become an issue really because you're healed from it. So I wouldn't have someone that was eating 6 times a day all of a sudden and they're on insulin and I'm like, okay, go to 2 times a day and don't worry about your insulin. I would never do that. Of course, the insulin is the doctor's responsibility to dose. But so I would I usually do work closely with the physician and the endocrinologist to make sure we're moderating when they're on insulin. But the people I work with tend to get off the medications. And so it's kind of exciting. We didn't learn about that in grad school. Let me tell you, that was not a thing. So yeah, I don't think the research on health span and longevity has shifted me way far from eating 6 meals a day or keeping that blood sugar going. In fact, I want you to have time off. I want your digestive time to have time off. And I've seen so many people get so much better in so many different things like GI problems and so many things just by eating less frequently.
As it relates to longevity and living a not just a long life, but a long, healthy life where you feel vibrant and wonderful till you're bye-bye. What is maybe the most surprising thing that you learned on that journey as it relates to nutrition in really creating a long, healthy, feel-good, energetic life till the end? Free of disease, hopefully, I should mention.
What?
Free of disease, hopefully, I should mention, right?
I mean, that's our subtitle of our book is we don't want you to just live longer, we want you to live longer, live longer, but live longer, and to how to add life to your years. Like that's the code, what's it called, the subtitle of our book. And I think for me, what was so shocking was that it's not about, because what I did learn in nutrition school was make sure you're getting everything, make sure you're not deficient, deficiency. Yeah. That was the deficiency model that's how it always was and still is, which is why everyone's counting everything, micromanaging everything. But what I've let go of, which I said before gave me all this peace in terms of what my messaging is now, is that maybe less is more. And we're not going to die of a vitamin C deficiency overnight. It just doesn't happen that way. And we have access to everything. I do have clients on a multivitamin because I don't want everyone to overeat in order to make sure they avoid deficiency. I think overnourishment is a bigger problem around the world right now than malnutrition or undernourishment, period. End of story. It's like there are more, for the first time in history in 2011, the overnourished outweighed the undernourished, which is mind-blowing. The biggest problem in the world in terms of food is overnourishment and not eating healthy foods. So I've let go a lot about this obsession with getting enough, very much so. In fact, I want people to get just enough and maybe not even enough, just have a multivitamin as a background. And that sounds a little crazy, and I'm like anti-dietitian to say that, and I'm anti-dietitian to say not to count. But I do a multivitamin just for safety, and I use the 6 daily 3s to cover your major nutritional bases. And people do better when they eat less. I've seen it now thousands of times.
So it's the eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's kind of sums up the longevity key. It's just that not overdoing it, not overabundance, not over nutrienting yourself, right? That's clearly a word.
I like that. I like that word. We'll use it. Let's make it work. Yes, I think so. I think a multivitamin it's not going to make you healthy. That's not what I'm saying, but it covers your bases so you don't have to worry. I mean, people are slugging protein shakes. I mean, I see these people at the gym. Well, when I used to go to the gym, they're all you hear of the trainer is saying protein, 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 and people slugging Gatorade and all this stuff while they're working out as if they're going to be deficient in their an hour workout, 1 hour, roughish workout. And I just think we've overreacted, and that's why people are struggling with issues that are directly caused from overnutrition. So I think we need to shift our thinking.
I've heard you get very passionate about two things. One are leafy greens, and the other one is the importance of B12. So we touch on B12 first, and then tell us why you love leafy greens so much.
Because then that is selecting a nutrient out of everything and saying this, we got to be, this is important.
Yeah. I love so much all the things that you've picked up on. These are such great questions. I thank you for taking the time to do that. Those are two very passionate subjects for me. Okay, so B12. Well, B12 is a micronutrient that's found in the soil. Microorganisms produce it. It's an essential nutrient for things like cognitive function, neurology, like our neurological function, and we don't necessarily get it on a plant-based diet. So animal products contain it because the animals consume the soil and they have it, and the ruminant animals produce it in their rumen. That's where B12 can be found on animals. That said, everyone says, oh, then a vegan diet isn't a perfect diet. Well, I disagree, because there is no perfect diet at all. There is no perfect diet. We all have to make conscious decisions of how we eat. On a plant-based diet, you can get a little B12 from fortified foods. Like, I love nutritional yeast, one of my favorite ingredients. I put it in everything. Yeah. It's still not reliable. And we're seeing, the last studies I looked at were 50% of vegans are deficient because they ignore this fact. And it's the easiest thing to avoid. It's cheap, it's simple, it's like 1 pill a week, really. You could do it at 1 pill a week. You could do 3 different dosings, which I'll talk about. But the reason it's such a tricky, I call it the most finicky vitamin, because it's got a logarithmic absorption curve. And not to get into too much in the science of it, but it's not easily absorbed. And anyone over the age of 50, with a 50, no matter what you eat, no matter how much meat you're eating, you still need to supplement with B12. Why? Because intrinsic factor, which is produced in the stomach, starts to decrease. As we get older, all the fun stuff starts to happen. That's one of them. And it's harder to absorb the B12. So if you have a gastrointestinal problem like Crohn's or IBD or anything like that, you are at an increased risk for B12 deficiency. So the easiest, cheapest, most reliable, and safest, because it's a water-soluble nutrient, way to avoid irreversible neurological damage, because it doesn't show up in the blood either. It's such an attitude problem, this nutrient. It's crazy. Like, you won't even see it for 5 to 10 years. And then if you start seeing symptoms, it could be too late. Usually it's too late. I've seen this happen. It's not pretty. It's really scary. And it's totally avoidable. So please take your B12. The most effective dosing options are 3 things. So if you like to take pills more frequently, I don't know many people that do, it's 50 micrograms twice a day, or 150 micrograms once a day. This is in all my books and on my website. It's everywhere. Ever Google me and B12, you'll find this, because I want everyone to know this. So it's either 50 micrograms twice a day, 150 once a day, or once a week, 2,500 microgram pill, boom, done. Don't have to think about it. You can get a shot once a week or once a month, however the doctors do it. But it's so important. Please take your B12.
Great. Even if you're a meat eater, you need to do that too. You need to. Meat eating doesn't guarantee that you'll get enough B12.
Mostly because our rivers and streams are that we have so many antibiotics and cleansers. Our detergent is in, and so it's killing the little microbiomes, right? And so the animals aren't eating as much B12 as they used to.
Well, we also wash our produce, and we don't drink from streams most often because we're worried about things that are dangerous, parasites and whatnot. Yep. So it's not even an issue in our today's society. We're not really getting it very well. But the whole thing with over age of 50, I mean, that's what Institute of Medicine says, that over the age of 50, you need to supplement. So it's not just a vegan thing. It's a very important thing.
Mm-hmm. And now tell us why greens are at the top of your pyramid, your personal pyramid.
Yes. So actually, I'm doing that today. Actually, I'm updating it. So I want cruciferous vegetables in there too, because they are that extraordinary too. Leafy greens and cruciferous vegetables are superfoods. Like there's such an over hyper use of the term superfood, but they deserve that categorization. They are superfoods. You get the most nutritional bang for your caloric buck when it comes to these foods. And when I'm talking about these foods, I mean spinach, kale, collards, bok choy. Dr. Esselstyn used to do this great little limerick with leafy greens that I love. I got that on my movie that I interviewed him for many years ago. But I also would add the cruciferous vegetables to that. So that would be Brussels sprouts and cauliflower and cabbage and all of those foods. Like that green pigment, not the one found in like M&Ms and Skittles, but the green, real, natural chlorophyll pigment, and all the things that are within there, like the carotenoids, and there's just all these wonderful phytonutrients that are powerful. They are anti-inflammatory. They are anti-carcinogenic. They are anti-angiogenic. They are cardioprotective and bone protective, and they do so many phenomenal things that they get all the credit where credit is due. And so eat them regularly, mix them up. The interesting thing about leafy greens is you want to get the lower oxalate greens, or at least prioritize, because I know a lot of people are like, oh, I'm eating spinach every day. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Good step. Don't do spinach every day because it's one of the higher oxalate ones. So mix it up. Kale is amazing. Dandelion greens, lettuce counts in this category, believe it or not, the lowly lettuce. Let us give some more credit to lettuce. I always say if the salad's not as big as your head or bigger than your head, it doesn't count. So I had one of those salads today, and I made a nut-based dressing because the fat in the nuts will help absorb some of those carotenoids and other fat-soluble nutrients that were in those beautiful greens and different cabbages that were in that blend. Eat them every day. You can't go wrong. They're extraordinary, cooked and raw.
Wonderful.
There's a lot of talk, really always in any kind of behavior change, that a support system is important. But you've said that with a plant-based diet, you know people need to really be prepared to go it alone. What makes you say that?
I don't. I really say that you need to do weight loss alone. But, well, this is a good question. Okay, I would argue with myself. It's really interesting because it's a different world now. When I went plant-based, everyone eats and everyone has an opinion about food. Literally, everyone has an opinion about food. And no matter how hard I tried to not have that conversation when I'm at lunch or dinner with a friend or family or anything, it always comes up because people look at what I'm eating or what I'm not eating, and it always becomes an issue. Even with my profession as a registered dietitian, and I speak everywhere, I've written 5 books, even still people are like, what about your protein? What about, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So like I say to my clients when they're working with me, like it's easier to gain the footing by getting the information from objective, reliable sources and not bringing it up, not letting them get sucked into these conversations because they plant seeds like, ooh, well, I told everyone I'm on a plant-based diet and now everyone's bringing up protein, so protein must be a problem. And then you start second guessing it. So when they're working with me, it's like, look, ask me anything. I'm your resource. I want to hold your hand through all of this. Let me give you the research. Let me show you this. Let me teach you that. Because anytime you go out into the real world, everyone's got an opinion about food, and everyone thinks they're an expert on food. And I think that's why there's so much confusion. So I do like to put my clients in a protective bubble. But then it's also nice once you're a seasoned plant eater, it's nice to have friends that are also seasoned plant eaters. You mentioned Kathy Preston, one of my favorite humans on the planet. Like she's one of my best friends, and it's so nice that we get to eat this. We love to eat the same thing. So I love cooking for people like that. I love cooking for my plant-based friends. I actually love cooking for my non-plant-based friends and family because I like to woo them in and lure them in with some delicious food. And like, I can't believe I didn't eat any animal products. I used to make these huge feasts in my house when I would invite people over, and everyone was like a big meat eater, and they would all leave. I made sure they'd leave really full and satisfied and asking for recipes. That was always my little goal. But so yeah, I mean, it's nice to have support, but first get some confidence and know what works for you and why, and get the science behind it so that you're more ready and sturdy to handle all of the naysayers, because there's plenty of them. There's still plenty of them out there.
We want to find out where people can find you and your own practice and share with us where that is. I'm sure people can do dietetics. I was going to say, telenutrition with you. So where they can find you and how people can have access to all your brilliance that you've shared with us today.
Thank you so much. Yes, well, you can find me at plantbaseddietitian.com. And I'm all over social media now. People have so many questions. And I just, especially nowadays with everyone at home and struggling, I want to be a resource. So I'm taking questions and I brought back my old, my TV show was What Would Julieanna Do? And then I did a What Would Julieanna Do Q&A series after that TV show aired. And I wanted to bring that back because it was a way of me taking everyone's questions and making little videos so I could just have these answers ready to go. So I'm on YouTube. I'm back on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter.
Thank you so much, Julieanna, for being on the show and for writing so many wonderful books that can educate so many people and make them as passionate about plant-based eating as you are.
Yeah, you're a true bright light.
So much. Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you both so much.
All right. Take care of yourself.
You too. Thank you, guys.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.